There we go. Thank you.
And I will wait till the very end to take questions. So if you have questions, jot them down and we can all go through questions at the very end of the presentation. I've got so much to show you, so I don't want to derail it and miss something. So living out here in the West, as many of you know, especially up in Wyoming, we're surrounded by amazing dinosaurs, and it's no different down here in Denver, where we've had a long history of discovering dinosaurs, mostly from the very end of the Cretaceous. So some of the first examples of T-Rex, in fact, the first recorded example of a T-Rex tooth was here in the Denver area in the late 1800s, as was the very first horned dinosaur, Triceratops, a chunk of a skull in the 1870s. And so I'm living here in Denver in some of the best dinosaur country anywhere on Earth. And that includes some spectacular finds. So this is our Pterosaurs that we discovered in 2017 on a construction site. It wasn't discovered by the museum, but it was called in as a salvage operation. And a lot like the amazing Pterosaurus that the Tate collected, was it Nicole is your Pterosaurus? Ours is named Tiny. And Tiny is by far the most complete Pterosaurus specimen ever discovered. It includes a 99% complete skull and about a quarter to a third of the postcranial skeleton. So this is a reconstruction of Tiny as it would have looked in life. And this is an artist's reconstruction of what Tiny the Pterosaurus would have looked like. So this is ancient Denver, ancient Thornton. So it's a suburb of Denver, surrounded by other little dinosaurs and critters that we find from the area. And that includes that big tortoise-like turtle you see in the lower right. That's a turtle called Basilemys, and little pachycephalosaur dinosaurs that you see there on the left hiding in the ferns. So this is what Denver would have looked like. So as a paleontologist, why would I ever want to leave my backyard? And I get that question a lot. Well, if we stray a little bit farther, so this is a little bit farther up north toward you all up in Wyoming. This is a dinosaur skull that was found in the early 1980s, in 1982, and sat in a county courthouse or county building for the last 35 years. It's a Triceratops, but what's really interesting about this specimen is that it's much, much older than what we typically consider Triceratops. So this is a skull that dates to around 68.5 million years ago. And most Triceratops specimens, which are some of the most common dinosaurs, are about 67 to 66 million years old. So this is a really old specimen, and we're really excited about it because there are features of it that look a little different from the traditional Triceratops, the two species that we currently recognize. So this is a very significant specimen. We're working on it right now in our lab. We're starting to do some of the hard science, the research behind this skull. We're going to hopefully send it off soon for some CT scanning. But it's not quite old enough for this talk. So we're going to push Pops the Triceratops to the side for now. We might touch on it a little bit later, but still great fossils in the Colorado Front Range extending up toward Casper, where you all are. And for the purposes of today's talk, I want to focus on what's called the lost landmass of Laramidia. So Laramidia was created when the Western Interior Seaway divided North America. So this was a seaway that extended from the Arctic all the way down to the Caribbean, with a landmass on the west that we named Laramidia, a landmass on the east that we call Appalachia. And here in Laramidia, it's particularly exciting because this is a time period when mountains were being built. So this is the first episodes of Rocky Mountain uplift. And anytime you pull or push rocks up to the surface, you're also causing the formation or downwarp of basins and lots of erosion. So this is a really good time for burying dinosaur ecosystems, especially on the eastern flank of this landmass, Laramidia. These are big coastal plains. And when we think about dinosaurs in the West, I'll draw your attention to my little scale bar at the top. We often think about dinosaurs from the late Jurassic. So Robert was showing me some pictures of Allosaurus at the beginning of the talk. So this is the time period of Stegosaurus and Brontosaurus and Apatosaurus. Here in the American West, up in Casper, you're surrounded by Morrison Formation fossils. Same down here in Denver. In fact, it's named after the town of Morrison, which is a town just west of Denver. And then, as I mentioned, we have really amazing fossils from the very end of the Cretaceous across the American West, including here in Denver. And those extend from southern Saskatchewan and Alberta down all the way to the Big Bend region of Texas. So amazing fossils from the very end of the Cretaceous. In a month, you'll get a talk from Jim Kirkland on fossils from the middle and early parts of the Cretaceous. So places like eastern Utah have produced amazing fossils from the Cedar Mountain Formation. Up in Wyoming, you have the Cloverleaf Formation. And some of these rocks even extend down into Texas and Oklahoma. So a really good window into dinosaur time from the middle part of the Cretaceous or the late early part of the Cretaceous. But Laramidia time occupies this kind of no man's land in the middle of the late Cretaceous. From about 88 million years ago to about 72 million years ago, Western North America was separate from the rest of North America and had these really amazing, thriving dinosaur ecosystems. And for really the past 120 plus years, these dinosaur ecosystems have largely consisted of amazing discoveries from north. So places like Montana and southern Alberta have produced dinosaurs like Styracosaurus and amazing duck-billed dinosaurs, armored dinosaurs. And as you'll see through this talk, these are the dinosaurs that are the key to unlocking Laramidia. So it's what I call the big four. So that's Tyrannosaurs, and then the three herbivorous groups, the armored dinosaurs, ankylosaurs, the duck-billed dinosaurs, the hadrosaurs, and then the horned dinosaurs, the ceratopsians. And mixed in with those are a ton of other little dinosaurs. You can see in this reconstruction, there are some dome-headed little dinosaurs there in the center, but also raptor dinosaurs and ornithomimids or ostrich mimic dinosaurs. So this is a time period of fairly familiar faces if you're a dinosaur geek like me, but really amazing diversity. And a lot of that comes from the north. And so this is where those formations are located. You see here, this is a rendering of what Western North America would have looked like with little dashed lines where the states currently are. The states, of course, didn't exist back in the Cretaceous. So these are dinosaurs that lived in the northern central part of Laramidia. And dinosaur ecosystems go all the way up to parts of North America where JP was digging, all the way to the north slope of Alaska, and they extend all the way south into central Mexico. So it's a really great time period for looking at dinosaurs distributed along this ribbon of land. And over the last 100 years, paleontologists have also been poking in on some of these southern formations. So that includes parts of southern Utah and New Mexico, West Texas. And in between are some dinosaur beds known to produce great fossils, but for which we don't have a lot of information. So if you're a dinosaur geek and you want to get out and find new species, I would say these four stars, these yellow stars, are great places to start. And that includes the Mesa Verde group just outside of Casper. So if you just head north out of Casper and hit Teapot Dome and some of those rocks, there are amazing fossils coming out of the Mesa Verde that we still don't quite understand and could be key to understanding the differences and similarities between these northern groups and these southern groups. So you're sitting up there in Casper on some really good real estate for solving some of these questions. This is what these formations typically look like. So big badlands, expansive badlands. A lot of them have been poorly studied because they're so difficult to access. So if you look at these, it's not really easy to get a big dinosaur skeleton or a bone bed of dinosaurs out from these really remote backcountry sites. So in the upper left, you have Utah. In the upper right, you've got parts of southern Alberta. The lower right, that's eastern Utah, some of the most remote cliffy areas of Laramidia that you'll ever find. And in the lower left, you have New Mexico. So really remote badlands areas. But of course, as paleontologists, we call these the good lands because they're full of bones. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So this is a diagram that you'll see a couple times through the talk. So on the left, the very far left, you have time. So all those numbers represent millions of years ago. This is all spread over a chunk of the Cretaceous that we call the Campanian. And then each of the stars on the right corresponds with one of the bars in the middle. And those are different rock formations and the time that they represent. So each bar is a little window into Laramidia time. And by looking across this diagram, you can compare different rocks from different parts of Laramidia. And that's what we're going to do today in this talk. And so the big question I want you to think about as we move through these different formations, the research question that I'm really interested in is how were dinosaur ecosystems distributed across a major latitudinal gradient, so north to south. So latitude divides these, going from the North Slope of Alaska, which in the Cretaceous was very close to the North Pole, all the way down into what was probably very tropical, warm environments in central Mexico. And so how did dinosaur ecosystems evolve and change along this latitudinal gradient? And how are they different? How are they similar? So these are some of the sub questions to this big overall question that we're going to investigate this evening. And so when I arrived at the Denver Museum 10 years ago, I wanted to really focus a lot of my research on these southern portions of Laramidia. And that was in part started by work that I did as a master's student at the University of Utah and the Natural History Museum of Utah under Scott Sampson. And really took off on some of these other journeys to kind of fill in some of the missing pieces of southern Laramidia. So we're going to focus on these 4 regions. And like I said before, this is really remote, really difficult to access. This is a glimpse of what the Kaiparowits Formation in southern Utah looks like. This is a couple of miles off the nearest road, and you can see our crew there, the little tiny specks in the middle, walking down a ridgeline to access some of our plant localities and a couple of our dinosaur localities down at the bottom of this. And so this is amazing relief, hundreds or thousands of feet of relief in some areas that you've got to climb up and down into every day, carrying plaster, carrying water, carrying rock saws, carrying jackhammers, and at the end of the day, carrying back all these amazing fossils. The roads are tough to get in on, so this is a little mistake I made early on driving off a cliff. It took us most of the day to get this out. And so we basically burned our day of digging this old pickup out of the hole. The rock is really hard. So most of these dinosaurs are in what's essentially concrete. So the cement between the sand grains is so hard, so concreted that you have to use demolition saws to cut skeletons out. This is a duck-billed dinosaur site, a Parasaurolophus or tube-crested duckbill that took us about 6.5 seasons to finish. And that was multiple weeks per season of just rock sawing and banging on it. So tons and tons of work. And then because most of these areas are remote and many of them are wilderness, we can't use wheeled vehicles. We can't use carts. We can't use trucks. We can't use ATVs. We have to carry them all out on foot. So this is a chunk of dinosaur from that quarry I just showed you coming out on a stretcher. So we carry stretchers into the field, both for our interns in case they slip and fall, but also for our dinosaur bones. Double duty out of that. But we also get to use helicopters. So this is some of the helicopter work that we do every year where we put camps back into really remote parts of the backcountry. And then at the end of the season, we helicopter out all these big blocks. So this is a big block of a duck-billed dinosaur head and neck, completely encased in skin. And we didn't want to separate this. We didn't want to pull it apart into smaller jackets that we could carry. So we just plastered the entire block and waited a couple of years till we had a helicopter big enough to lift it. And the reason we're out there is because the fossils are spectacular. So this is an example of hadrosaur skin impressions, not the knife. The knife is there for scale. I usually get some answer in one of these where I say, what do you think this is? And someone says, Swiss Army knife. No, this is dinosaur skin with a Swiss Army knife. Eggshell, we have some of the first dinosaur nests from this part of Laramidia. So most of the dinosaur nests that you're familiar with, so Maiasaura and some of the troodonted raptors are from Montana. In the south, we don't have good nesting sites, but we do have nests made up of broken eggshell. And so we think that these were successful nests. The animals hatched, the little babies hatched, they trampled all the eggshells down, broke them all, and then moved out once they grew up. So we don't have any of those rapidly buried nests with perfect eggs, unfortunately. And it might be something related to the difference in climate. So this was a much wetter part of Laramidia. You didn't have the drier uplands. And we get other parts of the fauna as well. So it's not just a dinosaur story. So this is that giant tortoise-like turtle I showed you in the first slide. So these were the turtles that lived along T-Rex. But they were also on the scene 10 million years earlier, 76 million years ago, living around these horned dinosaurs and duck-billed dinosaurs. So these are shells of this gigantic tortoise-like turtle. And what's really neat about these is we know they're all females because every single one of these shells so far has an unlaid clutch of eggs inside. So these turtles were coming to the site, likely to lay their eggs, and some event buried them all together. So it's kind of a sad story. So these were poor mother tortoises that got completely buried in some major flood event. The limbs are there, the armor, they have completely armored necks and arms and legs like an ankylosaur dinosaur. Really neat components of the fauna. And that includes other things like the snakes and the squamates, so the lizards, and even the little mammals. And so from all these fossils, we're able to start painting these amazing reconstructions. And so this is an early attempt at painting the Kaiparowits ecosystem in southern Utah. And as you'll see as we move through this, we have a lot more detail now. So as you think about dinosaur art, and I know some of you in the audience are artists, a lot of what we know is, or what we paint is based on what we actually know. It's based on real fossils that come out of the ground. And so for the purposes of tonight's lecture, I want to focus on 3 different parts of the American West, like I mentioned. One is in southern Utah. That's the Kaiparowits and Wahweap formations. And those are really the crown jewel of southern Laramidia. These have produced some of the most amazing dinosaurs really over the past 15 years. Northwestern New Mexico, the Fruitland and Kirtland formations. These are dinosaurs that have been known for over a century, but we're just getting started, I think. And there's many, many new species of dinosaur coming out of the ground down in New Mexico. And then I'm just going to touch on some new partnerships and some new dinosaurs that we're pulling out of West Texas. And so this is down in the Big Bend region, very southern Texas in the Aguja formation. So let's start with the Kaiparowits, because this is, like I said, the crown jewel of Laramidia, or at least of southern Laramidia. So the Kaiparowits formation is exposed in Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument in south central Utah, one of the most amazing, rugged, remote places you'll ever go. And if you haven't been down there, I highly recommend it. It's one of the coolest places I've ever worked, and that includes places like Madagascar and Antarctica and East Africa. I really love southern Utah. I'm always drawn back to southern Utah. And what's really great about the Kaiparowits formation is it's a perfect counterpoint to the best known dinosaur formation in the north, as the Dinosaur Park formation in southern Alberta. And so both faunas, both groups of dinosaurs, are centered right on 76 million years ago. And the resolution of the geochronology, so the dating of the rocks, places them really, really similar. So they're plus or minus a few tens of thousands of years of each other. So we can be pretty confident we're comparing apples to apples when we look at the differences between the Dinosaur Park formation and the Kaiparowits formation. And as I mentioned, over the last 20 years of intensive work, but really this goes back at least 60 years to other big groups out there digging in the Kaiparowits, we recognize at least 11 different types of dinosaurs today. Some of those haven't been described to the species level. So there's a Parasaurolophus and an Ornithomimus that haven't been fully described, but we've recognized these 11 dinosaurs, and most of them have been described over the last decade or so. So since about 2010, most of these dinosaurs are brand new to science. And among the superstars of Grand Staircase are the horned dinosaurs. So every time we find a horned dinosaur in southern Utah, it turns out to be completely different, a totally different species. And that includes Utah Ceratops on the left, which has little stumpy horns that stick out to the side. Ceratops, which has these cool rainbow brow horns that curve off to the side. And then this amazing array of what I call bangs. So it's got these little horns that hang over the front like little bangs. And then a bizarre dinosaur called Ceratops, which is a centrosaur dinosaur with a big nose and these really amazing bull horns that curve out and around and forward. And when we compare the dinosaurs from north to south, the first thing that's striking is how different they are. So we know that this is more or less the same time period. It's on a very thin strip of land. So this is southern Alberta being compared to southern Utah. So only a few hundred miles apart. And all of the dinosaurs are different, and especially the horned dinosaurs are completely different from the same aged horned dinosaurs in the north. And so there you see on the left a Styracosaurus and a Chasmosaurus, and on the right, those 3 horned dinosaurs that I just introduced you to. So completely different dinosaurs from north to south. It's a bit of a mystery. that mystery extends into other groups. So this is duck-billed dinosaurs. So there on the left, you have species of duck-billed dinosaur. On the right, you have the same genera. So on the top is a dinosaur called Griposaurus, and both places have Griposaurus, but they're different species. And then on the bottom, Parasaurolophus, the tube-crested, and both places have Parasaurolophus, but they're different species. And so this pattern seems to hold. It's not as strong as with the horned dinosaurs, but it's still there. And so this led to many different hypotheses called dinosaur endemism or dinosaur provinciality, where we have dinosaurs in the north separate from dinosaurs in the south. Can you hear me still? Nod your head. Okay, good. I got a message that said I was muted. There have been a lot of theories as to what the difference is. Something was going on in between these dinosaur ecosystems. So what separated them? Why were different species in the north and the south? And I think to really understand the root of this question, we have to go back and evaluate whether or not these are actually different, whether or not there are different endemic groups of dinosaurs and other animals from north to south on Laramidia. Some ideas were that they were separated by mountains, big river systems, but I think it's probably more simple, and it's probably a lot like our biotic communities today, which isn't surprising. And as we've worked in the Kaiparowits, and this is a big collaborative project with the Natural History Museum of Utah, with the BLM, so Alan Titus, the monument paleontologist has his own crew of volunteers and dinosaur diggers out there every year. This is an amazing example of collaboration. We're all making really cool dinosaur discoveries. So remember, we have 11 known dinosaurs from the Kaiparowits. And over the last decade or so, since I've been in the Kaiparowits formation, we've been able to add several more. And this is one of those discoveries that we made on our very first trip. This is a duck-billed dinosaur just coming out of the rock. So those are limb bones down at the bottom of the page. And this is what they look like back in collections as we're cleaning them up. So we've got parts of the tail, we've got parts of the spines, the backbone, ribs, even little chunks of the skull. And based on what we've seen so far of this particular dinosaur site, it appears that we have that missing third type of dinosaur from the Kaiparowits formation. That's the crested lambeosaur known as Hypacrosaurus. And so we have a Hypacrosaurus type duckbill, so it matches the same pattern that we see in the north, but just like we saw before, they're completely different at the species level. So it doesn't appear to be the same species that we find in the north from the same time period. And so what that does is it extends what we thought was a provincial pattern where all of these casque-crested lambeosaur dinosaurs, which previously had only been known from the north, it extends them down to the south. And in fact, I didn't color them in, but some of these other formations like the Cerro de Pueblo down in central Mexico also have the same type of dinosaur. So we now think that they were cosmopolitan, which means they were distributed across Laramidia for most of the late Cretaceous. And the reason we don't have them in the south is because they might have been minor players, or we just haven't found them yet. So we just need to get out there and keep digging. There are several new ankylosaurs coming out of the Kaiparowits. One of them was named a couple of years ago called Acanocephalus. And so far, most of the armored dinosaurs show the same pattern. So you get a cluster of armored tail-clubbed dinosaurs up in the north. And then Acanocephalus actually looks very similar to some of the armored dinosaurs known from New Mexico and Texas. And so again, this pattern continues to hold where there's differences in the big four. So remember I talked about the big four, including Tyrannosaurs. And even the little things are showing us some interesting information. We have a new Orodromene. So this is that pink dinosaur you see in the center of this reconstruction with the water dripping out of its mouth. This is a small plant-eating dinosaur. And we have amazing fossils now from several bone beds. This is a partial skeleton of a juvenile. So the scale bar there at the bottom is in centimeters, about 15 centimeters across. A better way to think about it is this is about the size of a kitten. So this would sit in the palm of your hand. And if we zoom in on this, you can see these are the lower jaws crisscrossed. Each of those teeth is just a little over 2 millimeters wide. So teeny tiny teeth, really small little dinosaur We have even adults of this though. So we have the entire growth series of a brand new species of orodromine dinosaur that I'm currently working on with Clint Boyd, who's at the North Dakota Geological Survey, and Bucky Gates, who's down at the North Carolina or NC State University. We're describing this dinosaur now. We wish we would have had it out if we weren't derailed by COVID. So hopefully we can get back on track and get this dinosaur described later this summer. And the story of the orodromines shows that, again, this pattern of apparent provincialism or endemism might be too simplistic. And so what we see is all of these orodromines are known from rocks that are about 75.5 million years old and older. And the reason we don't see them in any of these other southern formations is because they don't preserve this age of rock. And so the reason we don't get orodromines in New Mexico is because the Fruitland and Kirtland formations are potentially too young. Same for Texas with the Aguja formation and Mexico with the Cerro de Pueblo. So it appears that this type of dinosaur has a regional extinction. It goes extinct here in Laramidia around 75.5 to 75 million years ago. And so what we thought was a provincial pattern, we thought that they were only in the north, is actually a sampling problem. We only have young formations in the south. And I want to come back one more time to the horned dinosaurs. Remember, we've got these three cool characters, Utah Ceratops, Cosmo, and Nasuto Ceratops. Completely different from the north. In fact, we have 3 versus 2, so there was even one more horned dinosaur living at the same time period in the south than there was at the north. And what's really neat about these dinosaurs is, with the exception of Nasuto Ceratops, they all fall within the same group of chasmosaur horned dinosaurs. They're all closely related. So all of these are different horned dinosaurs from southern Laramidia, and you can look at how they change through time. And so each of these different formations is basically stacked, and we have different dinosaurs represented at different time periods, and we can track the evolution of this particular group of horned dinosaurs, which is really great. And so it was a bit surprising in 2013 when we started to find evidence of this dinosaur in the Kaiparowits formation. So this is the skull of another horned dinosaur. You can see it in the lower right. This is the orbit or the eye. That's the nose horn, the nasal horn. This is the beak out front. It's missing its lower jaws. Much of the shield is broken away, but we have the good parts. We've got the important parts, the parts that have the horns on them. And what we could tell from these new discoveries was that it didn't quite match those 3 that were already known from the Kaiparowits. And that was a bit of a surprise because we already had more horned dinosaurs than anyone else. So why have a 4th? And it turns out that after a couple more years of work, that this turns out to be a legitimate new species of horned dinosaur. In fact, we have 7 partial skulls and complete skeletons from this new species. And that includes juveniles all the way to very old adults. So you've probably heard this theory of ontogomorphs. So these horned dinosaurs change as they grow, change through their growth series. And we can show that this one does change as it grows, but it doesn't change into any of those other 3. So we can say that this is a distinct, different horned dinosaur from the 3 that were already known. And that means instead of having 3 versus 2, we have 4 versus 2 horned dinosaurs from the Kaiparowits formation versus the north. Pretty cool. So I'm going to blow your mind with yet another. So this is a site that we found in 2015. I had just gotten back from Madagascar, still jet lagged. I went down to southern Utah, and our preparator, Mike Getty, came running up to the car and said, "We found something totally different." And there was no way I believed him. We had already had 4 horned dinosaurs when nobody else had more than 2 at any given time slice. But got out to the site, we prepped some of these bones back in the lab, and it's, at least at the early stages of prep, appears that we do have something completely different from the other 4 horned dinosaurs from the Kaiparowits. And so we had a bizarre frill that Alan Titus at the BLM had collected years ago that we called Kaiparowits centrosaur B. We didn't have any more than this weird little chunk of frill. And I think that this particular site is a bone bed that includes at least 3 and maybe 4 individuals of this brand new species of horned dinosaur. So I think we have a 5th new horned dinosaur from the Kaiparowits. And a lot of people have asked me, well, aren't they from different levels in the Kaiparowits? Couldn't they be from different time periods within that same rock unit? And what's amazing is we've measured all these in now. We've measured in the old sites, the new sites, and all of them overlap within the same narrow stratigraphic window. They're all right around 76 million years old. So they all were living together at the same time. So instead of 4 versus 2 now, it's 5 versus 2. This is just absolutely insane. We have other cool dinosaurs. We have a new raptor. So this is a reconstruction that we got out well ahead of prepping the dinosaur. So you can see what that raptor looks like. It's mixed in with a new caiman relative or alligator relative that you see on the left that we presented a few years ago at a conference, and we're finishing up the description of this caiman relative right now. That extends the geologic record of caimans well into the Cretaceous, about 10 million years older than the oldest recognized caiman or alligator relative. And we see really neat early patterns of differential evolution between even the Tyrannosaurs. So this is the last of the big 4. And you can see that we have different dinosaurs from north to south, just as we expected, and what we saw in these other herbivorous forms. So it's pretty unique, pretty different. I think it's going to become a little bit more complex in the coming years, though, because I've seen some fossils that some other teams have found where the red Tyrannosaurs have been found in the north, and some of the blue Tyrannosaurs may have been found in the south. But there is definitely a center of diversity of both of these 2 different clades of Tyrannosaur relatives. And then, of course, we have other animals. And what do these other animals tell us? So crocodiles are a great metric. Mammals are a great metric. So are snakes and lizards. And so let's explore what they tell us as well. So if you look at crocodiles, we have at least 6 different alligator and crocodile relatives from the Kaiparowits. At the same time period, only 2. And so what that tells us is there may be something going on related to climate. So today we have alligators today in the south, but they don't make it too far north into North America. And that's a climate pattern. So maybe there's a climate signal that we're seeing from the crocodiles and alligators. So let's look at the lizards. So these are various lizards and fishes and sharks. These are parts of our microvertebrate fauna. And some of the recent work that's been done by Randy Neidham and Hank Woolley have shown that these lizard faunas are distributed in complex ways. So there are certain groups of lizards that are represented across Laramidia, as you see in the lower left with the green. But there are some that are only in the north and some that are only in the south, as you see on those right 2 panels. So this is starting to parallel what we see with some of our dinosaurs. And again, that's probably related to things like climate or differences in ecosystems related to climate. And to really get at climate, you need plants. So looking at our paleobotanical records from the south and comparing them to what's known from the north, we're starting to see a similar pattern with plants. So these are all fossil leaves collected from the Kaiparowits Formation in the south. This is a pattern that's seen by reconstructing climate. So by looking at different features of the leaf margin, the leaf attachment called the petiole, you can reconstruct what the climate would have looked like. And so each of these white dots on the map on the right were plotted by our paleobotanist down here at the Denver Museum, Ian Miller. And what he shows is that there is a distinct divide between temperate floras in the north and seasonally tropical or subtropical floras in the south. And so up there where you are is about where that dashed line is. So Casper sits right on that divide between yellow and blue. And so there's probably a difference in the overall ecologies of these different biotas. So the dinosaurs in the north preferred temperate environments, temperate plants, and the ones down in Utah and New Mexico preferred subtropical plants and subtropical climates. And that's the same pattern we see today. We have jaguars that could easily walk to Alaska, but for at least historically, they didn't. So at least at some point in the past, before we were persecuting them and shooting them every time we saw them, they didn't go to Alaska. The same for polar bears. Polar bears don't make it down to central Mexico, even though they're not cut off by any physiographical barriers. There's no big river or mountain keeping them from doing that. Animals prefer their ecosystems. And so long story short, we're still putting this together. This is a pattern that's still emerging. We have 9 named species of dinosaurs from the Kaiparowits, and over the next couple of years, a lot of these discoveries are going to be coming out, and we're adding 11 to 12 new species of dinosaur just to the Kaiparowits formation. So these are all at various stages of description, preparation, or coming out of the ground right now in the field. So these are all brand new species. So we're more than doubling the number of dinosaurs coming out of the Kaiparowits. So next we're going to switch gears quickly into the Wahweap formation. This is still in southern Utah, but this is dropping down to the next older rock unit. So the Wahweap formation has produced some really cool fossils over the years. That includes 5 named species of dinosaurs. Some of you dino lovers might recognize Diabloceratops, which is this amazing skull that was found about 12 years ago in southern Utah. But also things like the early Tyrannosaur Lythronax, the Machairoceratops, which is a close relative of Diabloceratops, and even some duckbill dinosaurs that link the Wahweap to the north. And as we've dug into the Wahweap and done some of the geological work, we've realized that we're not looking at a single fauna, we're not looking at a single group of dinosaurs, we're actually looking at stacks of different dinosaurs. And I think that you're going to hear a lot about that in a month when Jim Kirkland talks about the Cedar Mountain Formation, but this can extend to lots of different geologic units, including the Morrison Formation in the Jurassic, where we're not looking at one single group of dinosaurs, we're actually looking at many slices of time with different dinosaurs from each slice. And in the Kaiparowits, that's what we're seeing, in the Wahweap. So we have a basal biota, which is about 82 to 83 million years old. And then we have an upper biota that's somewhere between 77 and 78 million years old. So there's different dinosaurs living at different times. And based on what we know from other formations where the fossils are really well preserved, dinosaur ecosystems seem to turn over every 300 to 500,000 years. So the fact that we have more than 5 million years preserved in the Wahweap means we should be expecting lots of different species at different levels. And so by making some of these comparisons, we can do what we did in the Kaiparowits and the Dinosaur Park Formation, but with different rock layers. So there's not a lot known yet from the very top of the Wahweap. We just started to find some really cool dinosaurs from this interval. But once we describe them, we should be able to compare them from the dinosaurs that are known from Alberta, called the Old Man Formation. And the same for the south. So some of those really old dinosaurs from the base of the Wahweap should compare to dinosaurs coming out of nearby New Mexico, but also all the way up north in what's called the Milk River Formation. And so moving forward, we should start to have at least tests of that pattern of either provinciality or endemism. And I expect, again, it's probably much more complex, but it's a good excuse to get out and collect more fossils and do some cool paleontology. And as we've done that, same in the Kaiparowits, same as the Wahweap, we're finding new species of dinosaurs. So this is a dome of a new species of dome-headed dinosaur. This is the second oldest from North America. In fact, I've got that sitting on my desk right now. So I'm describing this one right now with David Evans from the Royal Ontario Museum. So you can see that's a little guy. It's about the size of a jumbo avocado maybe. And we have at least 2 species right now. So the other one's much tinier. It's about the size of a walnut. So we have an avocado and a walnut-sized dome-headed dinosaur coming out of the Wahweap. We also have 2 new centrosaur dinosaurs. So these are relatives of things like Diabloceratops, but also some that are completely different. So the one on the right we call the pizza crust Ceratopsian because it has that weird elevated rim on the margin of the frill. That's the pizza crust. Not the spikes, of course. I guess those would be like little breadsticks sticking out of your pizza crust. And we have other amazing dinosaur sites. This is an articulated gigantic duckbill dinosaur site. We started chasing the tail of this into the ground. And unfortunately, the front half of this dinosaur, this duckbill dinosaur, was missing. But I think the reason it's missing is these back here. These are gigantic phosphate concretions. And this is a time period about 82 million years ago, and we know that super gigantic alligatoroid Deinosuchus was on the scene. And we find Deinosuchus at sites just around the corner from this. So what it looks like happened is Deinosuchus was here eating the front half of this dinosaur and pooping right after it finished and moved away. So it left us the back half of a dinosaur after eating the head and the arms and the guts in the middle of the dinosaur. So even though we're probably not going to ever get a good idea of what this species is from this site, we do have this really neat story about the paleoecology of the lowest Wahweap. So there you can see this one reconstructed. So we have got the orange parts of this dinosaur so far. And much like the Kaiparowits formation, the Wahweap is rapidly expanding in diversity. So from 5 named species of dinosaur, we're about to add another 7 new types of dinosaur in the coming years. And I wouldn't be surprised if that expands even more with a few more field seasons. Every time we go out to the Wahweap, we find something new. And then the next formation, one of the last, is the stack of rocks in northwestern New Mexico. So I just want to touch on this one briefly. Hopefully you have a bunch of questions bubbling up inside of your head to ask me as I finish off this talk. But for now, I want to show you some of the neat dinosaurs we're pulling out of northwestern New Mexico. So this is an area, like I said, that's been covered for really 100+ years. The famous Sternberg family was digging down here in northwestern New Mexico a century ago, finding things like Pentaceratops. Also collecting things like Parasaurolophus. So this is the skull of a crested duckbill dinosaur called Parasaurolophus. It's a lambeosaurine. The Sternbergs collected one of these specimens in 1921, so exactly a century ago, and nobody has found another one of these since. But my wife was out walking around these bedlands in 2017 and stumbled across this site that produced the second and probably the best preserved example of this tube-crested dinosaur. It's one that we just described a couple of months ago, and it gives us really amazing insights into the way that the tubes are formed. And it turns out these tube crests are formed just like the other crested dinosaurs. And we've been able to do some amazing things on so far the reconstruction of what these animals look like, but also what we understand about their distribution. So again, getting back to that idea of north versus south, for a very long time, there was a second species known from what's called the Kirtland Formation in New Mexico that we thought was close to the species that we know from the north, from Canada. And this new discovery shows us that that's actually not the case, and that there is a southern group where we have Utah and New Mexico Parasaurolophus more closely related to each other than they are to the one from the north. So even within this single genus of dinosaur, we're seeing this different pattern where you have northern and southern forms. We've got other cool dinosaurs coming out of the ground. This is the Tyrannosaur called Bisdieversor. This is what the maxilla looked like in the ground, and this is what it looks like today. So this is after preparation. This is just the snout, but we also have the lower jaw. We've got the back of the skull. And this is a dinosaur that we're working on right now. It's already known from several really nice specimens, and we hope to add to that because this is such a beautiful specimen. It's disarticulated, so we can look at each bone in 3 dimensions. It's just an absolute beautiful fossil. And what we can do in New Mexico that's really difficult to do in other basins is track dinosaurs locally through time. So if you look on this diagram, the San Juan Basin is indicated there in red, that red blob, that's SJB. And dinosaurs you find on the south end are about 76 million years old, or 75.5 million years old. And if you track them through time to the northeast, you can get to the same level of rocks, but it's 73 million years old. So you're actually tracking an ecosystem through time. So if you look at it differently, imagine finding dinosaurs down here on the south end and then finding them all along this green strip to the northeast. And that's something we're really excited about. We've just started doing, following these dinosaurs locally through time and tracking them over 2 to 3 million years. And we can compare that same dinosaur ecosystem, which is in the same environment, as it moves, cross-cuts 3 million years. And we can also make these really nice comparisons. So for example, the Kirtland Formation compares really well to some dinosaurs coming out of northwestern Colorado and also southwest Texas. And that's the last thing I want to touch on, are some of these really amazing dinosaurs that are just now coming out from some private property outside of Big Bend National Park. There are many groups right now working in what's called the Aguja Formation of West Texas. That includes a team from the Perot Museum in Dallas, planning to head out there. A long history of work by the University of Texas at Austin in the Aguja Formation, among others. And so many people have worked there, but we're really excited because we're working with a partner at a museum called Texas Through Time, and he has discovered a bone bed of armored dinosaurs, these tail-clubbed dinosaurs, that includes at least 3 or 4 individuals, all the way down to little babies. So we have a small skull that's only about the size of 2 fists, all the way to a huge skull that's much bigger than my skull, 2 of my skulls. And so we're going to be able to see how these animals compare to the ones that are known from the north, and even places like New Mexico and Utah. So really cool new dinosaurs coming out of this new property. And we hope to get down there soon because they also have amazing small vertebrates, so lizards and mammals, and even plants. And the plant record of the Aguja Formation is something that really should tell us a lot about these latitudinal gradients. So whether or not you're in the true tropics versus the subtropics, and how that compares to the very far north with the temperate. And finally, I just want to end on this slide, and this shows the importance of this work. This is just what we're doing here at the Denver Museum. Each of these stars on the bars represents a pocket where we have good dinosaurs. This is a dinosaur fauna. And if we drag those stars off to the left, you see that we can actually track dinosaur ecosystems, at least in the sub-regional scale, so southern Laramidia, from about 82 million years ago to 72 million years ago. So 10 million years of time, we can track how dinosaurs were changing in the south and hopefully make those meaningful comparisons to the really important work that's been done up in the north, up in places like Montana and southern Alberta. So there's a lot of work to be done. If you love dinosaurs, you want to become a paleontologist, I very much recommend Laramidia as the place to go to find brand new species. And so with that, I'm going to end on this great picture. Everything you see in this painting is based on real dinosaurs and real fossils, all the way down to the little insect holes in some of the leaves. So this is as good as you can get in terms of teleporting back in time to the late Campanian of North America. So I'll end there with us sitting around the campfire. And hopefully you've got great questions based on some of the things you've learned in this talk. Thank you.
I've been keeping an eye on the chat and there have been lots of questions going through there, but I think if you would like to ask a question, just unmute yourself and ask.
Well, I saw one of the faunas, I saw some kind of oviraptorid that oviraptorid, and in one of the Facebook groups, I did ask in one of the groups on Facebook, you know, is it possible that there might be a North American oviraptorid, seeing that, you know, up in Asia, they have oviraptorids, and, you know, they have the basic like Cretaceous fauna, you know, Tyrannosaurids, Ceratopsians, and ornithomimids, Dromeosaurs, and, you know, that North America and Asia have both very similar Cretaceous faunas. So what would be your thought on an oviraptorid being discovered in North America?
Yeah, that's a great question, Robert. So as you can see, the oviraptor that Robert's talking about is this dinosaur in the middle of this scene. So it's kind of a gigantic chicken with a big crest on its head. Didn't have many teeth, mostly beaked. And these are really well known from across the Northern Hemisphere in the Cretaceous. So places like Mongolia and China have produced amazing oviraptor fossils. And they're also becoming much better known here in North America. We think that this group was widely distributed. They probably became widely distributed in the middle of the Cretaceous and evolved separately. And then there was likely an intermixing event late in the Campanian or early Maastrichtian. So once that seaway drained, you had a shift that allowed dinosaurs to not only disperse back across all of North America, but also disperse back and forth with Asia. And so we share dinosaurs between Asia and North America. So you get the appearance of the first true horned dinosaurs in places like China at the same time, and also some of the dinosaurs that are known from Asia appearing for the very first time in North America. So it's analogous to some of the big events that we have with mammals later in the Cenozoic, where our fauna is mixed every time that Bering land bridge appeared. And so we think that something like that was going on in the late Cretaceous, probably around 72 to 71 million years ago, getting that mixing. But those oviraptors were always here in the late Cretaceous, different lineages.
I commented earlier that Ceratopsian at the bottom row on the far left, that kind of looks like Pentaceratops. Kind of looks like.
Yeah, so the new dinosaur from the Kaiparowits, the one with the big horns and the big frill, is very close to Pentaceratops. So it's a very similar dinosaur, but it's about 1 million years older. So there have been some recently described dinosaurs from younger rocks in New Mexico that take that the Pentaceratops lineage into younger rocks, and we think that we're bringing that lineage back into some older rocks as well. So it's about 500,000 to 1 million years older than the true Pentaceratops of New Mexico. But good eye.
Oh, thanks. And I also noticed that I can't say the name of that ankylosaur you showed earlier. It does to me look a little bit like Euoplocephalus.
Yes, that one's called Echinocephalus. And the difference between the Utah, one of the main differences between the Utah ankylosaur and the ones in the north is that the nostrils have been wrapped around from the front. So the northern ones always have them toward the front of the snout, and it's wrapped around to the sides of the snout on Echinocephalus. And that's shared with another dinosaur from New Mexico called Nodocephalosaurus, which has lateral nostrils.
And I can't even say it even after hearing you say it. What is it? What is it? What is it?
Echinocephalus.
What does it mean?
Something about a spiky head. I can't remember. Some spiky, rocky head.
Now, when it comes to naming these species, how do you decide on a name?
Yeah, it's a great question. So to name a dinosaur, we often draw upon local lore or local customs, local languages. That's becoming a lot more popular to use and acknowledge the previous keepers of the land. So in cases like New Mexico, using the Diné language or Navajo language to use in dinosaur names, but also dinosaur names can be very descriptive. And so using things like the pattern of the horns or the pattern of the body or something unique about the skull can often be incorporated into the name.
And I also saw in one of your slides, it showed two different species of Parasaurolophus with slightly different crests. Has there ever been a point where anyone thought that might have to do with gender difference?
Yeah, great question. We think that the difference in the crest of Parasaurolophus, for everyone else, Parasaurolophus is again this one in the upper part of the screen. So it can vary between that curved macaroni shape to a really long, much straighter shape. And we know based on some fossils that that's related to age. So that's what we would call an ontogomorph. And so that crest shape changes as it grows. But in some cases, it could just be related to differences in what they were actually using the crest for. So whether that was for display or for communication, because we know that those were hollow, and they might have been used to help amplify or resonate sound. And so the differences in shapes could be related to sex, as you say. It's really difficult to test without a really big population of really nicely preserved skulls. But at least we know that it's related to age and in some cases probably display functions.
I have a Wilfred, I guess, had a question in the chat. I don't know if he's got a microphone, but he typed it into the chat. He's one of our regulars. So the duck-billed dinos from the south have smaller crests. Do you have a hypothesis about why that is?
Yeah, it's a really interesting observation. And both of these shorter crested hadrosaurs, the Parasaurolophus certocristatus and the new species from Utah, we don't know for sure. They happen to be some of the older members of the group. And we also know that the crests do straighten out a bit as they get older. We don't have a good hypothesis. One of the ideas for Parasaurolophus was that those chambers were potentially for cooling. I don't think that that's the case. It might just be related to the fashion of Southern Laramidia. So that was what was in style back 76 to 75 million years ago.
Does that answer your question?
Have you found any Spinosaurids?
Yeah,
in
great
North
question.
America?
Yeah, Spinosaurids are a really unique radiation of meat-eating dinosaurs or theropods. For those of you who don't know your full taxonomy of dinos, they have the big narrow crocodile-like snouts. Many of them get elongated vertebral spines, some of them becoming extreme into big sails like Spinosaurus itself. And so far, those are, as far as we can tell, restricted to what we call Euro-Gondwana. So they're present in the Middle Cretaceous in Europe, and then they make it down into the Gondwanan land masses of South America and Africa. And they even appear in places like Southeast Asia. But one place they don't appear, and we haven't found them yet, is in North America. And so we don't have any Spinosaur relatives or Spinosaur derivatives, any of their ancestors or descendants in North America at any point to our knowledge. Although it might not be surprising to find one in some of these Middle Cretaceous or very early Cretaceous time periods where we have other close relatives or relatives like Carcharodontosaurs that are also known for mostly Euro-Gondwana, but they might be here as well. There's evidence of
I do know of one Carcharodontosaurid in North America from the early Cretaceous. Acrocanthosaurus.
Yep, that's right, Acrocanthosaurus, and there's some from the Cedar Mountain Formation that you might hear about in about a month with Jim Kirkland's talk from Eastern Utah.
Do you think that was like a temperature thing? Do you think like the Spinosaurids were just, I don't know.
It's most likely related to biogeography. So the fact that these dinosaurs could cross barriers, short barriers, but mostly needed land bridges or connections. And so there wasn't probably a good connection at the right time when Spinosaurs were diversifying and radiating and moving out from places like Africa and Southern Europe. And so we think that maybe they just weren't in the right place at the right time to make it into North America. But it is a hypothesis that can be tested by finding new fossils. And so getting out and looking in the right aged rocks in the early Cretaceous of North America might change what we know about Spinosaur evolution.
Well, I mean, we might not find Spinosaurids, but it maybe wouldn't surprise me to see like some sort of convergence where different types of dinosaurs specialize for the same thing, because there were a lot of rivers in ancient North America.
Absolutely. And the convergence of ecologies and body shapes is pretty common between the North and the South. You see these parallels where tyrannosaurs are really large, dominant predators with really large heads, but really tiny arms. And in the South, you have Abelisaurids, which is a ceratosaur, much more basally branching or primitive group of meat-eating dinosaurs that landed on the same way of eating and feeding with a big head, big wide head, and little tiny arms. So there could be a Spinosaur-like theropod appearing in North America. You could even imagine a thing like a tyrannosaur getting a longer crocodile-like snout based on the ecology.
Yeah, speaking of Abelisaurids, I also heard the same question about and in one of the Facebook groups. What if there's an Abelisaurid somewhere hiding in North America?
We know that they were here in the Morrison Formation. So Abelisaurs were cosmopolitan in the Jurassic. I think all of these questions underscore the need for more work. So more people getting out, looking for fossils, and especially hitting areas that haven't been explored before. So going back to the same old formations and digging there every year is going to produce really great fossils, but you might not be able to find these really unique, rare things unless you get to some of these rock units that haven't been touched before. So if you're a paleontologist or an early paleontologist, focus on those rocks that haven't really been explored. That's where you'll make the really big discoveries.
I actually also have another question.
Yeah, go for it.
So I'm looking at the slide that's like on the screen now, and I'm noticing with the Ceratopsians, a lot of them have really deep skulls and big beaks. Is there like a specific reason for that? Like the plants were tougher or they had a different diet?
So that hasn't really been tested, the biomechanics of Ceratopsian skulls and the differences between especially the rostral morphology. Everybody's focused on the frill and the differences in the shield and the spikes. And that's what's really useful for taxonomy. But there are potential differences in the length of the snout, the depth of the snout, and how that would influence things like feeding ecology. So the types of food you might be able to access, and also other aspects of physiology. So a big snout with a big nose might allow you to move your nostril around a bit, or or play with display structures on your face and not just on your shield. So there's a lot more to be done. So if you're looking for a master's project or a PhD project on horned dinosaurs, I think that is a really cool one that could be explored that really hasn't received, I don't think, enough attention. The front half of horned dinosaurs is at least their face has been largely ignored,
Well,
except for the horns.
I mean, in a few years when I make it into college, that might be what I do my PhD on.
Yeah, I think it's a really cool story. And I think we even see it with Pterosaurs and Triceratops. It hasn't been observed in detail yet, but most of those early reconstructions of Pterosaurus were based off of Triceratops. So it has a much longer snout, but based on the discovery of Nicole and Tiny, the two new Pterosaur specimens, I think what we see is actually a much shorter, deeper snout than the Triceratops that lived at the same time. So maybe they were eating or doing something different.
And that makes me wonder if that may solve, the whole debate of Triceratops and Torosaurus being as one or two. Not that I'm 100% convinced on either side. I'm 50-50.
It is a hot
personally.
topic. I'm not touching it. That's another talk.
No, I was gonna say-
You'll have to bring me
That's a
back.
completely different topic.
Hey, Joe, I got a question, Joe.
Yeah,
Have you guys
JP.
found any pterosaur bones in all these piles and piles of bones out there?
We do. So there are some really nice pterosaur bones from the Kaiparowits formation that were collected by Andy Farkey, who's at the Raymond Alf Museum down in Southern California. We've collected a couple of pieces, and one of our sites, that one I showed you with the rock saw and the really hard concrete, that one's producing little bits and pieces. We have part of the neck, we've got parts of the limbs. So we're getting scraps, but they're not really well preserved in terrestrial settings. So it's really hard to bury a flying reptile with bones that are the thickness of rolled up pieces of paper. That's why we get most of them in marginal marine settings.
And it's so uncommon. They're so rare in the Hell Creek and Lance.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can count them on one hand.
They could fit in one cabinet
And,
after 150
Joe,
years of
one with
digging.
the chat, is it micro or micro? And Shelley Coyne have some questions. So why don't we pass the talking stick to them?
There's quite a few questions in the chat, so
And
Hello. First off, thank you for the lecture. It was very interesting to hear about these dinosaurs coming out of the Southwest. I have two questions, actually. First off, I was wondering, are there any major differences in the anatomy of the Dromeosaurs in the North and the South? Like, for example, the size? Or is there just, like, not enough material to tell?
I would say there's just not enough material to tell. So the Dromeosaurs, for those of you, again, who don't know your dinos, are the raptor. So those are the velociraptors and their relatives like Utah raptor and Deinonychus. And there seems to be a lot of diversity, and we can tell that from the teeth from north to south, but the diversity lines up pretty well. So we have similar teeth morphologies from north to south in most of those different categories. And the sizes appear to be pretty consistent. So it's not like we get most of our giant ones in the south and small ones in the north. But I think that is mostly speculative, and we just need more fossils. And so these are, like the pterosaurs, really difficult to fossilize, difficult to preserve because they're fairly delicate and pretty small. And so we just need to continue collecting, and we'll eventually find enough of them, I think, in the next few decades to make some meaningful comparisons between north and the south.
Yep.
Speaking.
No,
go ahead.
Yeah, and the other thing I was wondering though is there's just so many of these ceratopsians, and it's really amazing how many different species of them there are. But they're all very similar to each other, except for obviously the horns and the crests. So like, is there any speculation as to what's going on here? Or are they each filling slightly different ecological niches, or is there something else going on? Is it like species identification, or?
Yeah, so the extreme diversity, and that includes, at least 3 or 4 from the Kaiparowits and probably 5 once we get our other site done. I think that represents something that we see today, where we have many different types of artiodactyls, so things like deer on the scene at any given time, and they're all doing something slightly different. They're eating different foods, they're living in slightly different subhabitats. So even though they're in the same area, some might prefer lowlands or river margins versus coastal plains. And so I think a lot of that, the differences that you see on the frill are for sure linked to things like sexual selection or species recognition. But the differences in their ecologies is something that hasn't been studied. And so things like geochemistry, looking at the isotopic differences and similar dinosaurs from the same formation might give us a little hint about that. But there's a lot more to be done. Also, just looking at the ontogeny, looking at whether or not these are true species. I think there's some really interesting points that have been made by other scientists that some of these might be blurring a bit. And so there's a lot that's unknown. And you guys are really keying in on all of the big question marks, which I like.
Going back to the frills on ceratopsians, I've heard some of them, especially chasmosaurs, from when I used to watch Planet Dinosaur. They may have been too fragile for defense against tyrannosaurs. So, what kind of tests have been done with the frills to see how hard they are, to see if they were too fragile for defense?
Yeah, so a lot of that hard biomechanical testing hasn't been done on the diversity of these horned dinosaurs. And you're right, most of them are probably too thin and fragile to act as a defensive shield, so covering the neck or really resisting any form of attack. Probably the only one that could do that was Triceratops, which really went extreme in the thickening and robustness of its frill. And you find things like T-Rex bite marks on the frill. So even that didn't probably help that much. So that's why we think that these really thin, delicate frills, the ones with the big openings called fenestra, the big windows, were probably there as billboards, as big signs stuck to the back of the head for some form of communication, whether that is species recognition, sexual selection. We still don't know. There have been some studies looking at one or the other. But for sure, they were used mostly for some form of display. We just don't know what that display was at this point.
Oh, I have a question from the chat. Someone was wondering, you talked about a lot of new species, and they were wondering, would you be allowed to give any hints as to when and if we could see some of the publications about the new species?
Yeah, so there will be a couple of new horned dinosaurs later this year that should be coming out, as well as those dome-headed dinosaurs, and even some of the theropods. So some of the cool meat-eating dinosaurs should be hitting probably late 2021 or early 2022. So I think this is going to be a really great year because all of us paleontologists had time sitting at home, not going out to dig these fossils. So there's going to be a dinosaur boom in 2021 and 2022 based on all of this work that we're doing, sitting at home at our computer with nothing else to do except look at fossils and casts of fossils.
Yeah. Speaking of new species, I've kind of wondered, I know, once something is discovered, and not everyone will agree overnight that it's something new rather than already something already discovered, maybe in a different stage. But how long would it be until maybe another dinosaur encyclopedia book, those dinosaur books that have names of dinosaurs A to Z, how long would it be until these new species would be in a new dinosaur book?
Well, several of them are being worked on right now. So that big dino encyclopedia called the Dinosauria is undergoing a major rewrite. And so I know a lot of those chapters are being completed or submitted at this point. I think it's gigantic. I haven't heard, but I wouldn't be surprised if that has to be split into multiple volumes at this point. Just because we're in the midst of a dinosaur renaissance. We are finding so many amazing new dinosaurs because we're exploring places that haven't been touched before, but also because we're going back to museum collections where some of these fossils have been sitting for a long time and just lumped in with other forms. And so right now, if you're a dinosaur enthusiast, there's no better time to be alive than in the midst of this current dinosaur renaissance.
We had another. Oh,
Never
sorry. Real quick, we had another question from Deb Mayers. She said, I'm an ancient historian, so it's great to see similar difficulties in the field. When doing reconstruction work, do you take into account multiple interpretations?
We do. So we go back and forth when we make these reconstructions, and we'll try lots of different versions. We look at the way that these fossils were crushed or distorted. And for those of you on here who are paleo artists, you know that it's really aggravating sometimes to work with us scientists because we ask you to redo it a million times. But that's because this is, even the artistic aspect of paleontology is a science. And so we're trying to get it right based on what we have, the little information that we have from fossils, before we turn the artist loose to completely go crazy with the interpretation and the colors and the amazing scenes and the dynamic movements. So we're working together, and yeah, it goes through many iterations of changes. A lot of those are the scientist's fault for not seeing it properly in the first place.
Joe, I heard a great lecture the other day from somebody who's doing virtual paleontology. They're doing biomechanics stuff in the virtual world so that you can see better how things could move and how they might not be able to move, which would help with the figuring out the construction things you were just talking about, what actual body shapes and poses were actually possible. It's really cool. I could put you in contact with that person if you're interested.
Yeah, I would love that. Yeah, computers have completely changed the way we do a lot of this work, especially biomechanics. When in the old days we had casts stuck together with rubber bands to move them around. Now we can just do it all virtually, just a scan of a bone and stick it into virtual space instead.
I actually read a lot about using computer models and simulations for reconstructing dinosaurs in Steve Brissati's book.
Yeah, it's the next wave, I think, will be all these investigations utilizing computers.
I actually also have a reconstruction question. When I'm looking at a reconstruction of a dinosaur from even like 10 years ago or something, they seem like really shrink wrapped or way too muscular. It seems like they would be like a bit more bulky than that. Is there a reason for that? Do you think that they were built more muscularly?
So some of those early what we call shrink wrap, so really muscly toned dinobods with tight skin, is a conservative way to reconstruct a fossil that we only know from bones. I think that there is a bit of a shift in the paleo art community to look at the modern animals and how diverse their soft tissue coverings are, the volume that their body takes up. It's not necessarily as tight around their bones as has historically been reconstructed, but that is a very conservative way to reconstruct a fossil. Probably not
Speaking as a former perpetrator of the shrink wrapping school of art, I think in the early days, a lot of us were trying to prove that we were really looking at the skeleton this time and not just creating some blobby parade float version of a dinosaur, and perhaps went a little bit overboard. I can't speak for the other shrink wrappers like William Stout and Greg Paul, but that's my excuse.
I like that explanation. I agree.
Yeah.
I think it's a conservative way to show the anatomy based on what was known. And they were
Also,
so
I think
fit. There were just so much
T-Rex that
fitness
was
back in the Cretaceous.
like a hippo in Jurassic Park, it would just look a bit goofy.
Yeah, it's different. It's a different way of thinking about it now. I see that there's a question, Howard Friedman. I'm not sure if you're Howard, but you've been raising your hand for a long time.
Yes, hi, my name is Virginia. And I was wondering, what kind of trace fossils have you found? Tracks or coprolites or anything in this formation?
All of these different rock units have amazing trace fossils. So we find great dinosaur tracks in the Kaiparowits and the Wahweap formations. There are amazing coprolite records in a lot of these different rock units. In fact, Karen Chin, who's here in Colorado at the University of Colorado Boulder, has come out with me into the Kaiparowits and described several duck-billed dinosaur coprolites. Some of them even have things like parts of crabs or decapods and snails. And her hypothesis is that they might be eating some of these other parts of the fauna at least at points in their annual cycle when they need higher protein. So possibly when they're nesting. And so all of these records are locked into these rocks as well. So that's another component that I didn't even touch on. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
Thank you.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you were seeing a repeat of the pattern in northern Laramidia, where centrosaurs are often found in multi-individual bone beds, sometimes large multi-individual bone beds, and chasmosaurs are commonly found as individuals.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. We've only found a couple of Ceratopsian sites that have more than one individual. There are, I think they can be counted on a single hand. Most of those are chasmosaurs where there are two individuals. But that new site I showed you with that new potential centrosaur B, has at least 4 individuals, and that appears to be a really extensive bone bed, probably most similar to the ones in the north. Although we don't have anything on the scale of some of those northern dinosaur bone beds where you have hundreds of individuals and literally acres and acres of dinosaur bones. We don't see that anywhere in these southern formations, which is interesting. And I think that's probably either a reflection of the different environments. And so the way that the precipitation and flood events move through these systems, or it's a reflection on the actual ecology of these animals and that they were more distributed. A lot like large mammals are in rainforests today. You don't find big herds of tapirs moving through the Amazon like you find big herds of elk in the north. And so it could be ecological as well.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I think Preston had some questions. Preston, you want to ask? Are you still here, Preston?
Yeah, I'm still here.
You had a question about microfossils?
Yeah, so I was wondering, like, do you use frequency of microfossils such as bacteria? I know some bacteria actually fossilize. So I was wondering, like, how often in terms of climate and especially precipitation and different, like how wet the environment is, how often do you use that compared to more macro fossils such as turtles?
Yeah, one of the great things that microfossils or microorganisms do is change the environment, the local environment around them. And so they alter the geochemistry. And so there's an entire field of geologists who look at geochemistry and the differences between things like carbon and oxygen isotopes. And a lot of that is potentially derived from these organic or biogenic films or biogenic processes. And so the decomposition or the change, the alteration of soils and soil chemistry is really intimately linked with these microorganisms. And so that is an entire field. And we do work with many geochemists to try and interpret what these environments look like and what the climates were 76 million years ago in the Kaiparowits, for example, using what we think are carbonates that might be in part influenced by microorganisms. That's a great question. We don't usually get the fossils though. We don't see a lot of bacterial fossils. Although I'm not looking for them, so they're probably there.
Okay.
You have to really crawl on your hands and knees to find those.
I feel like I'm asking a lot of questions, but I have a lot of questions, so I'm going to ask them. Like, just from the logistics of an actual dinosaur dig, what's harder to dig up? Those like little fragile fossils that you would find in pterosaurs, or the really big ones where you have to like haul it around?
Oh, that's a great question. I think the little delicate ones are the most nerve-wracking. Those are the ones that give you nightmares because you feel like you're gonna make a mistake at each hammer stroke. But the big ones are so much work. Those ones are the ones that give you the gray hairs and the chipped knuckles and the broken bones. Those are the really difficult fossils to get out of the ground, where it's in a super hard sand and it's heavy and you flip a bone over and it lands on your toe and you can't walk straight for the next 2 weeks. Those are the bad ones.
When you mentioned the nerve-wracking digging up bones, I just remembered something really stupid I did once.
We all do stupid things. I remember plowing through many bones in the field. I don't do it anymore though.
No, because you're now a PhD. Hey, Joe, technical question. Helicopters. How do you guys get your helicopters, and what's the weight limit? Have you ever had a jacket that the helicopter guy just said, nope, not doing it.
Yeah,
Then you have
so helicopters are tricky because they do have weight limits and they don't like wind and they don't like warm weather. The typical helicopter we use lifts about 2,000 pounds. Really, they like 1,500 pounds or less. We've had a couple of really huge ones. Our biggest is 4,000 pounds. And we had to get a really big dual rotor helicopter to get some of those fossils out. So the body that went with the skull of that big horned dinosaur was 4,000 pounds. That one took a special lift. And so it's just reaching out to different companies. A lot of them operate in southern Utah for outdoor recreation or for search and rescue. And so reaching out to some of those companies for when they have downtime or when they're moving a helicopter through the region, be ready to drive out there at a moment's notice. And so that's happened many times. Jump in the car and you've got to be there by tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. and it's a 12-hour drive.
Was that Ceratopsian skull you just mentioned? Was that the largest skull, the largest fossil you've collected so far? The heaviest?
That's the body that went to that skull is the single heaviest fossil that has come out of Grand Staircase via helicopter. That is 4,000, so 2 tons, 4,000 pounds is the new record for a single block. Although I'm sure, you know, if we could have access to big helicopters all the time, we would push the limits on those things as well and get up closer to 8,000 pounds. Because we hate separating these skeletons, you know. You want to keep your dinosaur intact, like the big T-Rex up at the museum there. You want to keep those things as close to intact as possible.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. In which also, that kind of led me to another question, because I'm sure many times we've all seen all the dinosaur skeletons in the museum when they're complete. But I'm sure it can be I'm sure it's confusing for you when you're out in the field and you find multiple specimens together. How do you know which skeleton bones belong to which specimen when they're all bunched together?
Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of our sites can be bone beds, and you do get lots of individuals disarticulated, so the bones have come apart and mixed together. And that's a bit of sleuthing. So you have to try and match things based on ontogenetic stage, so the age. But at some point, you just have to throw your hands up and say, this is a bone bed. Each fossil is not going to be associatable, and it gets its own museum number. So we know that, you know, this is a representative of that species, and it might be a bone that you don't have from another individual, but you just have to say it's separate and you don't know. And that's okay. At least we're learning about these animals one bone at a time.
We had another question in the chat. How often have you found the skin impressions compared to the bones?
Well, so the skin impressions vary based on formation. So the Kaiparowits is amazing because of rapid depositional rates. And so you find things like skin on many of your articulated dinosaur sites, mostly on hadrosaurs, but also even on some of our horned dinosaurs. And there's even evidence of skin and other internal organs on some of those from the Kaiparowits. But if you go to a place like New Mexico, where you have much more high energy rivers covering these dinosaurs, much more disarticulation, you don't find the skin impressions as frequently. So it really depends on the local formation and the conditions of deposition associated with fossilization.
And then another question that's popped up 3 or 4 times. Why are there no sauropods?
The big sauropod hiatus. Yeah, so sauropods, or the long-necked giant dinosaurs, were known here in North America into the middle of the Cretaceous. So you'll see a bunch of them in a month from the Cedar Mountain Formation. They're present up in the Cloverleaf Formation up there in Wyoming, but then they disappear. So there is what we call a sauropod hiatus during most of the time of Laramidia. So for some reason, we're not finding the fossils. It doesn't mean they don't exist. And I've heard rumors that there are a couple chunks of evidence of some sauropods in some of these deposits. And so it's possible they were just living in different environments that don't typically preserve, or they absolutely went extinct in North America and didn't come back until the very end of the Cretaceous, when some of those land bridges were restored, either land bridges with South America or with Asia. And we don't really know where some of those last sauropods came from, but there's one called Alamosaurus, which is known from places like Utah and Big Bend of Texas and New Mexico.
And,
It's a big one too. It's a monster.
Yeah, speaking of the skins, I do see someone's asking here, and I kind of have the same question. Are you ever has anyone ever been able to tell what color the skins were, such as with these hadrosaurs and also with the T-Rex skins?
So that work is currently being done by several groups. So we know that we can determine at least some pigment forms and colors from feathers. So feathered dinosaurs have been really key to unlocking color. And so it's possible that there are some of these pigment cells or pigment shapes of cells preserved at that interface on skin impressions. But you really need spectacular preservation. And a lot of these skin impressions are in sandstones. And so that means you're getting a lot of water movement and diagenesis. So you're changing the chemistry around that skin interface. And so it's up for debate whether or not it can happen. But, you know, in paleontology, I say never rule anything out. I wouldn't be surprised to read a paper in 5 years where someone has unlocked a way to look for pigments in dinosaur skin impressions.
Oh, and also another thing that did pop up from the hadrosaur skin impression I saw earlier. You know, seeing that, you know, we know that feathered dinosaurs, they were able to brood and keep their eggs warm thanks to their feathers. But how would ornithischians like hadrosaurs take care of their eggs and keep them warm? Like, would they have to cover their eggs with plants like maybe sometimes crocodiles do today?
Absolutely. So there's, just like in modern archosaurs, so birds have a diversity of ways of incubating their eggs and moving their eggs. And if you extend archosaurs into crocodiles and alligators, you see even more ways to lay a nest and incubate those eggs. It doesn't mean you abandon your nest if you're just burying them. Like an alligator still protects their nest site. They just don't sit on top of it. But I would never want to walk over to an active alligator nest to see what's going on, because there's one for sure lurking nearby and it'll come rushing out at you. But yeah, they probably incubated their nests in a variety of ways, using sediment to cover them, using vegetation to cover them. And in some ways, dinosaurs may not have needed to warm their eggs. They may have needed, in some environments, to actually keep them cool. And so some of those feathered dinosaurs that are found on nests may actually be trying to protect those eggs from things like the sun and cool them rather than incubate them and keep them warm.
Has there ever been any research, or is there a paper on that? Because I admit this is the first time I've actually heard that the possibility of, you know, keeping them cool.
Yeah, so this has been hypothesized in several of those papers where they've shown dinosaurs covering the nest, and that it's possible that they're covering them to protect them from heat rather than warm them up. Birds do that today. So birds will do that at night. They'll keep them warm, and during the day, they'll try and keep them cool. So you really want to keep your eggs at a really narrow temperature range. And so dinosaurs were almost certainly doing the same thing in a variety of different ways.
What about gender and temperature? I know like some alligators definitely have like gender, they change as opposed to like what temperature. And I actually wonder like what evolutionary, you know, advantage that would have, first of all, and if dinosaurs did that.
It's a great question. We don't really even have a good grasp on gender in adult dinosaurs. And so to be able to go back and parse that out from an even rarer component of the fossil record, which is nests, I think is going to be difficult. But I think the potential is there that dinosaurs could have had similar gender discrimination based on temperature that turtles and other archosaurs do today. Again, these are animals that lived for over 150 million years. I'm sure they explored every possible way to incubate, protect, raise young that you can possibly imagine, with the exception of lactation and the production of milk. So I think the diversity of dinosaur forms is probably repeated in the way that they reproduced as well.
Oh.
So Oh, I'm gonna jump in real quick. I imagine we could keep Joe here all night with questions, but I do want to let him go at some point. So I wanted to say thank you, Joe, for joining us and for giving this talk. This is amazing, and we all appreciate you coming.
Yeah,
JP's
this has
doing
been
the
fun.
slow
I'll
clap
have to-
on his screen without unmuting himself.
And I want to come back and actually give a talk in person someday. So hopefully in another year or two, I can get back up to the Tate.
That would
We'd
be
love to have
awesome.
you come by.
Yeah.
Cool. Good.
So
Well,
thank you.
We want to thank all you folks for showing up. Thank
I'm gonna
you.
have to show up for that. So
Well, just us.
Hi, Angus, is that
Hi,
you?
everybody.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. We appreciate it. And don't forget to join us next month on May the 4th when we have Jim Kirkland talk to us.
Can I email Joe questions? I want to email Joe some questions.
Yeah, please email me questions.
Oh, good. He's still there. Oh, yeah. Can we get your email and also can we get a copy of the talk itself? Would be.
Or if you have a website.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a website on